In this lesson, we're going to be talking about dividing integers, and our essential questions are: how are multiplication and division related? How do you divide integers? And how do you use division to find the mean or the average of a set of integers? So we're moving along here in our operations. We've already talked about adding, subtracting, and multiplying, and now we're going to talk about our last operation, which is division. So our first question here is: how are multiplication and division related? Now, just in the same way we talked about addition and subtraction and how they were related, we're going to use what we've learned about multiplication to help us apply or discover some rules for division. Division and multiplication are related operations, so we can use what we know about multiplication to learn about division. So I've got some statements here that are true, so we can kind of observe what we've already learned about multiplication here and apply it to our rules for division. So first, we know that 5 times 7 is 35. So the related fact family equation would be 35 divided by 7 equals 5. We know that these two things are related and they're true. Since 5 times 7 is 35, that means that 35 divided by 7 is 5. So we know that those two operations are related in such a way, and those are facts. Now we can apply what we know about multiplying positives and negatives to see what would happen with division. Same idea here. The next fact, 5 times negative 7 is negative 35. We know that to be true because a positive times a negative is negative. So now if we look at the related division fact, that means that negative 35 divided by negative 7 has to equal 5. So here we can see that whenever we have a negative divided by a negative, that's going to turn out positive using the facts that we know about multiplication. Take a look at the next one. Negative 5 times 7 equals negative 35. Therefore, negative 35 divided by 7 has to equal negative 5. And now we know that a negative divided by a positive is going to end up negative. And then lastly, negative 5 times negative 7 is positive 35. We know that from what we learned about multiplication. Therefore, 35 divided by negative 7 has to equal negative 5. So now we know that a positive divided by a negative is going to be negative as well. And then, of course, the first one, a positive divided by a positive is going to be positive. That was a fact that we kind of already knew. So this pretty much establishes all of the facts we need to know about division. Now you'll notice they look very similar to our rules for multiplication, and that's what we're going to see. Now if we divide integers with the same sign, you're going to get a positive, just like you do with multiplication. So a positive divided by a positive is going to be positive, and a negative divided by a negative is also going to be positive. So it's the same rules as for multiplication. So there's nothing really new here when it comes to division, so pretty easy to remember if you already know the rules for multiplication. Likewise, dividing integers with different signs, a positive divided by a negative, that's going to be negative, and a negative divided by a positive is going to be negative as well. So let's use what we've just discovered now to find each quotient here. Let's divide these values. Negative 35 divided by negative 7. Well, 35 divided by 7 is 5, and since the signs are the same, it's going to be a positive 5. Next one, negative 63 divided by 7. Well, 63 divided by 7 is 9, and the signs are different, so this is going to be a negative 9. And then up here I have negative 64 divided by negative 8. The signs are the same, so that's going to be a positive and a positive 8, since 64 divided by 8 is 8. And then this next one, 110 divided by 10. Now we're going to see this sometimes with this negative kind of hanging out in front of that division bar there, or that fraction bar, and sometimes students are confused. Well, which number does the negative go with? Well, to be honest, it really doesn't matter which one you apply it to, as long as you don't apply it to both. So this expression right here could be interpreted in two ways: negative 110 divided by 10, or positive 110 divided by negative 10. That negative can go either way. It can go with the numerator or the denominator, or the top number or the bottom number. Either way, it's going to end up being a negative because the signs are different. So it really doesn't change how we answer this, and that's going to be 11. 110 divided by 10 is 11, and the signs are different, so that's going to be negative 11. And that's dividing with integers, pretty straightforward. And then we want to address, how do you find the mean or the average? Well, whenever you want to find the average of something, you're going to have to use division. That's why we talk about it here. So the mean or the average of a set of numbers is the sum divided by the number of items in the set. So you add all the numbers together and divide by how many numbers there are, and that's how we find an average. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. We have Linda, and she had scores of -3, -2, 1, and 0 during 4 rounds of golf. So here are her scores, and then she had 4 rounds, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to find the mean and interpret the quotient. And we're just going to find the average and find out what that means. So to find the average, we're going to have to add all of her scores together for the 4 rounds. So we have -3 plus -2 plus 1 plus 0. And -3 plus -2 is -5. -5 plus 1 is -4, and -4 plus 0 is -4. So that's the sum for the 4 rounds. And now we're going to take that sum and we're going to divide it by 4 because there were 4 rounds of golf, and that's a -1. So what does that -1 tell us? That's her average score. So it tells us that she had an average score of a -1 on the 4 rounds of golf, or 1 under par. Next one, the last 4 transactions Jessie posted in her checkbook were -$35, $23, -$156, and $60. Find the mean and interpret the quotient. So we're going to have to add all of her transactions together and then divide by 1, 2, 3, 4, since there were 4 transactions in her checkbook. So we're going to add -35 plus 23 plus -156 plus 60. And then we're going to divide that all by 4. And then when you add all of these together, you get a -108. Save you some time on that. And divide that by 4. And this is a negative divided by a positive. That's going to be a -27. And that's the average. Well, what does that mean? That means that Jessie loses on average $27 per transaction. And that's a loss because it's a negative number. So she's losing $27 per transaction. And that's pretty much division. So that takes us to the end of all 4 of our operations. So I've got a little summary here of the 4 operations. So we've got addition. And remember, if we have the same signs, we're going to combine their values. And if they were different signs, they were canceling. So when we're adding, same signs combine, different signs cancel. And then we had subtraction. We talked about subtraction. And really here, we wanted to focus on connecting it to addition. When in doubt, convert it to an addition problem by adding the additive inverse or the opposite. Add the opposite, and then you can use your addition rules. And then the last 2 lessons, we talked about multiplying and dividing, and they have the same rules, which were same signs, it's going to end up positive, different signs, they're going to end up negative.